I found the answer to a problem that's been plaguing me for years. During the past century, knowledge has multiplied 1,000 times faster than during all the preceding ages of man, and knowing that to be a fact, I couldn't figure out why people didn't seem to get any smarter, why the 20th century, with all its wonderful breakthroughs in all fields of human knowledge, has been one of the most barbaric in man's history. Well, in his excellent book, Some Lessons in Metaphysics, José Ortega y Gasset reminds us that man by himself would never be a student, just as man by himself would never be a taxpayer. He must pay taxes. He has to study. But he is, by nature, neither a taxpayer nor a student. To be a student or a taxpayer is an artificial state in which man finds himself by obligation, so people will learn no more than they absolutely must, which isn't much. Now, meanwhile, generation after generation, a frightening mass of human knowledge which the student must assimilate piles up, and in proportion as knowledge grows, is enriched, and becomes specialized, the student will move farther and farther away from feeling any immediate and genuine need for it. Each time there will be less congruence between the sad human activity which is studying and the admirable human occupation which is true knowing. And so the terrible gap, which began at least a century ago, continues to grow, the gap between living culture, genuine knowledge, and the ordinary man. Culture, or knowledge, has no other reality than to respond to needs that are truly felt and to satisfy them in one way or another. But the way of transmitting knowledge is to study, which is not to feel those needs. Therefore, culture or knowledge hangs in mid-air and has no roots of sincerity in the average man. Now, this culture, which does not have any root structure in man, a culture which does not spring from him spontaneously, lacks any native and indigenous values. Now, this is something imposed. It's extrinsic, strange, foreign, and unintelligible. In short, it's unreal. Underneath this culture, received but not truly assimilated, man will remain intact as he was. That is to say, he will remain uncultured, a barbarian. And when the process of knowing was shorter, more elemental, and more organic, it came closer to being felt by the common man, who then assimilated it, recreated it, and revitalized it within himself. This explains the colossal paradox of these decades, that an enormous progress in terms of culture should have produced a man of the type we now have, a man indisputably more barbarous than was the man of 100 years ago, and that this acculturation, this accumulation of culture, should produce, paradoxically but automatically, humanity's return to barbarism. To say the problem might be solved by not studying at all would not be to solve the problem, but to ignore it. If a whole generation should cease to study, 9/10 of the human race then alive would die a violent death. To solve the problem will take a deep reform of study and the student. In order to achieve this, one must turn teaching completely around. Primarily and fundamentally, teaching must be the teaching of a need for the science, and not the teaching of the science itself, whose need the student doesn't feel. But that's why we don't get smarter. I have an interesting question for you here. What is life? This might be a question you'd like to bring up at the dinner table with the kids. What is life? Do you have a pretty good answer? There is a good one, and it was given to us by the same José Ortega y Gasset. It appears in his book, Some Lessons in Metaphysics, which we recommend. That's a book I think every thinking person should read 10 or 15 times, and I know you'll enjoy it. He wrote, "What then is life? Do not search far afield. Do not try to recall learned expressions of wisdom. The fundamental truths must be always at hand, for only thus are they fundamental. Those that one must go forth to seek are the ones that are found only in a single place, the particular, localized, provincial truths, the truths in a corner, not the basic ones. Life is what we are and what we do. It is, then, of all things, the closest to each one of us. Put a hand on it, and it will let itself be grasped like a tame bird." You can read for 20 years and not come up with something as true and basic and marvelous as that. Life is what we are and what we do. Life is what we do and what happens to us. Life is always a now, and it consists of what now is. The past and the future of your life have reality only in the now, and this is thanks to the fact that you now remember your past or anticipate your future. And in this sense, life is pure actuality. It is punctual, a point in the present, which contains all our past and all our future. And then Gasset would say to his students at the University of Madrid, "The purpose of these lessons is no other than to incite each of you to take care of your life, for you have only one, and that one is composed of a given number, a very limited number, of instants, of nows. To use that number badly is to destroy it, to kill a bit of your life. Nothing of what we do would be our life if we did not take account of it. Living is that strange, unique reality which has the privilege of existing for its own sake. All living is one's own living, feeling oneself live, knowing oneself to be existing, where knowing does not imply intellectual knowledge or any special wisdom, but is that surprising presence which one's life has for every one of us. Without that knowing, without that awareness, an aching tooth would not hurt us. The stone does not feel itself, nor does it know itself to be a stone. Toward itself, as toward everything else, it is totally blind. Living, on the other hand, is a revelation, a refusal to content oneself with being unless one sees or understands what one is, a become acquainted with oneself. It is the incessant discovery that we make of ourselves and of the world around us. In its very root and heart, living consists in knowing and understanding ourselves, in noticing ourselves and what surrounds us, in being transparent to ourselves. Life is what we do. Life is what we do because life is knowing what we are doing. It is, in short, finding ourselves in the world and occupied with the things and the beings of the world. And here's another question you might want to pop on your family at dinner or a friend at lunch. In the billions of years since the Earth's formation, what was the most important thing that ever happened on Earth? I got to thinking about this at lunch the other day, and I think it makes for an interesting topic. What's the most important thing that ever happened on the planet Earth? Do you know? Well, if you think about it for a few minutes, you realize that it was the appearance of man. If it hadn't been for him, no one would ever have known the Earth existed. But we still don't know if the appearance of man was good or bad. Good or bad, that is, from the standpoint of the billions of other creatures on the planet. About 9,000 years ago, man began his first rudimentary civilization with the planting of crops and the domestication of animals. And in all the centuries since that time, he's been growing progressively worse, as far as being a neighbor is concerned, worse to all other living things, including himself. In the Pogo comic strip, one of the characters said, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." But it wasn't until the 20th century that man really showed what he was capable of. With the Industrial Revolution and burgeoning technology, man was able to outdo even himself, with the result that ours has been the bloodiest century in the history of man. Following the communist takeovers in Russia and China and the other countries they've managed to corral into their imperialistic sphere, millions upon millions of men, women, and children have been killed. It's been estimated that 6 million were killed in Russia alone. No one knows how many were slaughtered in China. This was after the Japanese did a pretty good job there themselves. Then came World War II. I'm not mentioning World War I. We were still learning then. In addition to the millions who died as combatants, many more millions of innocent civilians were slaughtered under Hitler and Nazi Germany, perhaps 8 million, maybe more. Since the dawn of this century, and it came in so softly, so quietly, there has been more pure, unadulterated mayhem and slaughter than in any former 10 centuries put together, capped with our own invention of the atomic bomb, which was designed, built, and dropped for the specific purpose of wiping out entire cities the way you wipe out an anthill. Overkill. Men, women, little children, the sick and the pregnant, the blind, the helpless. Kill 'em all. The ultimate weapon was finally invented, and the means to deliver it to any spot on the face of the earth in minutes. Of course, it's undergone a whole lot of improvements since 1945. We've got thermonuclear devices now that can wipe out an entire country. In fact, we're approaching the point now where we have more missiles than targets. One missile, the MIRV, can incinerate in an instant millions of civilians in a whole collection of towns and cities, and the century still has a few years to go. I wonder what the 21st century will be like. Because all we've proved in 9,000 years is that we keep getting more efficient at killing each other. You might pop that question to your family or your friends at lunch. What was the most important thing that ever happened on the face of the earth? Well, it was the appearance of man. Next question, was it good or bad? From the evidence so far, there's really only one answer to that.